Well, hey again, everyone. It's time for a next lesson for confirmation. This week, we're going to look at two different things in two different videos. And I know some of you probably are confused that I seem to have skipped over one of the commandments, but really, it's about putting it together with this last commandment so that we can talk about them in connection to each other. And that is this week, we're going to talk about first about the commandment against adultery and then the commandment against coveting. And they have a lot in common, so I wanted to put them together. It's important for us to understand what they are. And in order to do this lesson, you're going to need, first of all, your catechism, also your Bible to take a look at that, and then something to write with, of course, to jot down some ideas that you can bring to your small group conversation this week. So take a minute to go get those if you don't have them already. All right, so in this first video, we're going to talk about the commandment against adultery. And I know sometimes this is a hard conversation to have, because in reality, the overtness of it, at least the language of it, really talks about our sexual relationship with a spouse. And especially for people who are in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, that's a kind of a strange conversation to have, because most of you at least are not thinking about marriage yet. But the conversation about sexuality is a big part of what goes on even in junior high. You guys have relationships that you're forming with each other, and people of the opposite sex, and people with the same sex, even in our context. And those important relationships need to be talked about. The commandment against adultery is really about faithfulness, and it's about faithfulness to a single other person. God commands us to know and to be sexually intimate with just one person in our lives. And so this commandment about adultery is about remaining faithful to that person, even, and I want you to think about this for a second, even if it's remaining faithful to a person you haven't met yet. So take a second to think about what I mean by that and see if you can jot down a few ideas. Pause for just 2 or 3 minutes and think about what it means to be faithful to someone you don't even know yet. Okay, so if this is about remaining loyal, or that is faithful, in both thought and mind and body to a person that we will make or have already made a commitment to, that's really what the commandment about adultery is about. It's about avoiding having those kind of intimate conversations, intimate relationships with people who are not our spouse. Commandment against coveting is similar, and it asks us to refrain from even desiring that from somebody else. But it's important in this context to think about what it means to be faithful to just one other person. So I want to have you right now take a look at a passage in 2 Timothy. So I want you to read 2 Timothy in chapter 3, and I want you to read verses 2 and 12. You can read what's in between as well, but especially those two verses, chapter 13, verses 2 and 12, and see what you think that means for the standards of the leaders in the church. And see if you think that should apply to everyone, or is that really just for leaders in your mind? So take a minute and think through that. Okay, so this commandment to honor our spouse really has to do with the commitment that we make, not just about having sex or not having sex with our spouse or with somebody else who's not our spouse, but also the psychological part of it. Why do you think God gives us this commandment? Well, let's think about the possibilities of that. What are the negative consequences of that kind of intimacy with somebody who is not your spouse or to whom you have not made a commitment? I want you to take a minute and think about the possibilities there. What would happen in a case where you did, in fact, engage in intimacy at that level, and then the relationship fell apart because you were not committed to each other? Make a list of 3 or 4 things you think would be the consequence of that. Okay, so often these are things that we talk about even in health class. We talk about unwanted pregnancy or sexually transmitted diseases, but it goes way beyond that. Intimacy at this level implies a commitment, and an exclusive commitment between partners. And what happens when you share yourself with each other in such an intimate way and then break apart, can be devastating to either or to both partners in the situation. It also kind of cheapens that gift of yourself. If you're willing to give that level of intimacy, whether it's psychological or physical intimacy, to someone else, to lots of other people, you have not saved that level of intimacy for only that exclusive person in your life. And then when the relationships gets broken, emotional pain is the result. So if we think about then why God has given us these commandments in the first place, they are about our protection, about ways that we can help ourselves to stay away from the negative consequences of doing really dumb things in our lives. If we engage in this intimacy and it doesn't work or it doesn't work out, if we're not prepared to make a commitment to each other and then ultimately the relationship falls apart, what does that mean for us? God would save us from that pain. God would save us from that pain by not having us engage in that way in the first place. Remember, again, like always, God's commitment for us, and the reason we have these commandments, is to make our lives better, not worse. Okay, and this discussion of this commandment also brings up an important point. There is a special word, and I'm going to have you look this up, about celibacy. That is, to people who remain committed to not having any sexual relationship with anyone for their whole lives. That's actually a gift that is talked about. So I'm going to have you read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 16. Pause the video here and read 1 Corinthians 7, verses 1 through 16. Okay, having read that, I want you to think about this. Even at the junior high level, and especially at the high school level, what kind of pressure is there on you to have a relationship with somebody that is sexual in nature? And what kind of pressure is there on somebody who has been given this gift, do you think, of celibacy and expresses no interest whatsoever in any kind of sexual relationship? God considers that an actual gift, as does St. Paul in writing to the first letter of the Corinthians. It's a gift that we're able to avoid even the distraction of that level of intimacy and psychological connection in that marriage relationship, and then able, because of that, to serve God more directly and more intimately than we otherwise would. Take a minute and jot down what you think of that idea. Would having no partner in life, having no, at least marriage partner in life, make you better able to serve God more specifically, more directly, and more intimately there? Write down what you think about that thought. Okay, and this last word I want to give you is, how can you then honor and respect somebody, maybe even at the age of 13 or 14, who has no interest in those kinds of relationships and shows no interest in those relationships, despite how much society is pushing us to do that? Think about that question, and then go ahead and turn this off and write down a few notes, and then we'll see you next time.